Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Your Spa Life show. Spa Life is a lifestyle that accepts that accomplishment and harmony coexist. The Spa and Spa Life, the SPA, is for Seek Power Always, that power within you to do your deeper work in the world. I am thrilled to introduce my special guest today, David Wood, who's also known as the Tough Conversations Ninja. After his consulting with actuaries in the Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies, David built the world's largest consulting business in coaching, and he became the #1 Google search, get this, #1 Google search for life coaching. He believes that tough conversations we avoid are the doorways to confidence, success, and even love in both health and home and work life. David coaches high-performing entrepreneurs and executive teams and even prison inmates. We'll get into that a little bit deeper as we talk here, and has amazing results with connection, one conversation at a time. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Diane.
It's good to have you here. How is it that tough conversations became your go-to?
I've been drawn to courage for a lot of my life. I've actually recently been called counterphobic, which apparently means you lean into your phobias. If you're scared of something, you go and do it. So, like a kid, I didn't stand up to bullies, and that hurt. That hurt me. I think it hurt more than if I'd gotten punched in the face, because I carried it for years, and I didn't know how to speak to girls and ask them out. So later in life, as I learned to confront my fears and go and have the difficult conversations, I found that my life changed and connections started to deepen, and I felt better about myself. Every time I had those scary conversations that I would lean into, perhaps because I was counterphobic, I would feel better about myself. I get more confident, I would grow, and often I would change something out in the world that I didn't know I could change. So I got a lot of support when I was younger in coaching, in having these tough conversations. And now I want everyone else to have access or choice around leaning into and having a tough conversation with mastery instead of avoiding it and just carrying that avoidance for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, definitely. How did you make that transition from going to somebody who, felt you were getting bullied and you weren't able to maybe ask girls out? And, how do you make that transition from, almost standing away and from those things to actually leaning in?
Well, I was lucky enough to get into a personal growth course. So for me, it was a big revelation, and they keep on having me look through my past and see what's incomplete. What, is there someone I'm still resenting? And I had plenty of people from my past, and they'd encourage me to call them. And I'd say, you're crazy. I'm not going to do that. So we'd look at why, and I'd look at what I was afraid of, and I'd get coaching on it to the point where I was willing to actually be vulnerable and call someone back from school days even. And like I called a bully, someone who I felt bullied by, and I'd resented him and I hated him for years. And I called him and said, I've been carrying this for 20 years and that doesn't serve either of us, and I'm going to let it go, and I wanted to let you know.
Wow.
Like, those things aren't easy to do, but with coaching and support, I got to do them. And now I believe there's no conversation that can't be had. You might risk something. That's why it's a tough conversation. You might risk someone getting angry. You might risk losing your job, someone divorcing you, or ultimately going to prison. You can risk a lot of things, but I believe that usually, like 99% of the time, there's profit in it. What you gain is going to be greater, particularly if you're spiritual at all. It's going to be greater than what you could lose. Are you willing to take that risk? And I've done it over and over and over again.
Right. Oh, I wholeheartedly agree that is something, when you have those conversations and you put it out there, there's so much possibility, and the things that you maybe fear the worst, when it's all out there, then you can explore them and be able to look at them from a different angle as well. What would you say had been one of your most toughest conversations that you've personally had?
One of the hardest was when I realized that I'd never said I love you to my mother. And this is at the age of 27. My family never said it. I don't remember hearing it from either of my parents. And I decided that I wanted to break the cycle. And I called her I was in America and she was in Australia at the time. And I called her and I was terrified to say those words for the first time in my life to my mother.
Wow.
That was one of the hardest ever.
Yeah. And how did she receive it?
Well, I don't remember a lot of fireworks or fanfare. I mean, she's, classic Australian. It was probably something like, oh, well, that's good. It was probably something like that. But,
thanks for sharing.
But then 2 weeks later, I called her about something else and she goes, oh, I wish you'd stop turning over these stones. I said, what do you mean? What stones? She said, well, after you called me 2 weeks ago, I realized that I've never said I love you to my mother.
Wow. And
she told me she drove the 5 hours to go and visit my grandmother and decided that she's going to, after, how old was she then? Like 62. She's going to tell my grandmother that she loves her. And over the 5 days, she kept finding a reason to put it off. Oh, it's not time yet. It's too early. Oh, she's busy. And then finally she said, oh, she knows. She knows. And then she said goodbye, walked down the path, got in the car, turned on the engine, and a voice said in her head, you may never get to say it again, because she's over 80.
Yeah. Wow.
So she turned off the engine, walked back up the path and said, there's something I forgot to tell you. I love you.
Wow, so powerful.
Yeah. So this is one thing I realized. This was an epiphany, and I was about 27 at the time, that I realized I thought I was just impacting my own life. But no, when I have these tough conversations, I'm impacting the people that I'm talking to, and I'm modeling for them something that they might be then brave enough to go and try with someone else. And then who are they going to impact with? Like my mother and her grandmother. And so there's a ripple effect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so many times we don't see how far that ripple is going to go, but yet when we actually go out on a limb and do something different, it does impact everyone because it gives permission to them that they can do it as well. And it may seem, easier than you think. I mean, why do you think that people avoid having these conversations, even though they would hear, hey, there's good benefits and you can get some good things out of them, but why do we still avoid them?
Yeah, well, it's natural. We don't want discomfort. Humans generally run from discomfort, and I'm one of them. It's hard for me. And we want to be comfortable. So doing an ice bath, for example, a lot of people just won't do that. And I understand.
Right.
But it's just discomfort. And so if we have the reason we don't want to have that tough conversation is because it's uncomfortable of some kind. It might be awkward. I might be vulnerable. People might judge me. They might resent me. We could lose something. So there's some fear of loss. Could be, again, your relationship, or it could just be feeling awkward. So this is natural. And the other thing I've realized that we want to avoid is triggering the other person. We want people to like and love us. And it's no fun to have anybody angry at us or upset with us. And I believe this comes from childhood. So why would you have a tough conversation with someone when they might get triggered? I just had a conversation with two business partners, and I said, I want you guys to do more in the business. Now, I was worried about it, and the reason I was worried is because they might get defensive.
Right.
So you got to be willing. Firstly, if you do it artfully, if you do it really artfully, the chances of them getting defensive or triggered are way reduced. So, and I can give you the 4 steps to having a tough conversation, and we can even give people a download, or they can download the blueprint. But if you do that, your chances are reduced. But if they do have a reaction, you need to be willing to be with them,
right,
while they have it.
Well, definitely. I'm sure that our listeners are going to want to know what those 4 steps are. So yeah, let's share that.
Great. Okay. Well, firstly, there's a worksheet which can take you through about 6 questions and prepare you. So we'll call that step 0, is get yourself prepared.
And is this for work or home, or is this specifically for work?
This is work or home. This is any tough conversation. Okay. This will help you get clear on why you're scared about it and what the benefit could be. You'll create all that. Is there a request that you could make so that you could be cause in the matter and not just be complaining? And the last question in the worksheet is, I really like this, is how might they see this? Like from their world, if you step into their shoes, how might this look from their world, and how might they react to this? Then once you have that, you jump into the 4 steps, which are, 1 is enroll them. You want to enroll them in having the conversation, because, they're just sitting around. They might be watching TV. Your boss might be busy doing some work. You got to give them a reason to want to have what could be a potentially awkward conversation.
Right.
So the 2 ways you do that is you ask permission. Hey, can we have, you could even say that. You can use those exact words. Can we have a potentially awkward yet possibly interesting conversation for 5 minutes? And then give them your intention or your hope for it. Like why would they want to have this conversation? My hope is it'll get us on the same page with our work so that we work better together. Or my hope is that I can just get it off my chest so I can be more focused at work. Or my hope is that it'll bring us closer in our relationship. Whatever, give them a reason that they'd want to actually listen to this.
Right. Right. Now, I can see where there's these are some positive effects to enroll them more in the conversation, to make it easier to have that tougher conversation. Do you, by chance, use some of the potential negativities that isn't necessarily negativity, but something that may come up that may be a trigger for someone by putting it out there? So I knew from my law enforcement experience that there were negotiation techniques where we would actually put things all out there, like, you probably think I'm going to trick you, or you probably think, that I'm not going to have your best interest at heart, or you probably think this is going to happen, where you're able to put all of those things out there of things that they already may be thinking. Just putting all the possibilities out there allows that conversation to be more real. Do you feel like that comes into play at all?
Well, I think you bring us to step 2 right now, which is, it sounds like you're talking about preempting. And this isn't the aim of the step 2, but it could do that. Step 2 is where you share one fear or concern.
Yes.
So, my concern in bringing this up is you might get defensive, or my concern is you might get upset or angry, or you might not hear me out, or you might judge me. My concern is you might think I'm a real wuss, I'm oversensitive or whatever.
Right.
So yes, that does actually kind of possibly preempt, but that's not the goal. The goal is simply to be vulnerable and to name out loud what's happening so that they can relate to you better. If you come to me and say, I'm a bit worried to have this conversation because I'm worried you're going to think less of me, I start getting curious, and now you're a bit more vulnerable, and I feel like I'm drawn into the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit more of an even playing field of emotion and conversation at the same time.
Yeah. So we've got to enroll them with asking and sharing your intention. Mm-hmm. You're getting their buy-in. You're selling the conversation, right? Then we've got sharing one fear or concern, and that's an optional step, but I think it's very useful. And then the 3rd step is to share the issue. Let them know what's up, what's bugging you, or what are you wanting, or whatever your issue is. And if you have a request, this is the place to throw it in. I would ask for something. I'd ask that when you give me feedback at work, that you start with something I did well. Like, pick something good rather than starting with the negative, so I can feel better about the work and I can hear more what you're going to say, as an example.
Yeah.
Or my request is that you, when you take your shoes off, you put them in the cupboard, every time. And then once you've done that, this next step is really important. You get curious and listen. And this is where you might negotiate. My habit, and I still have it, is I come in with my side my perspective and my world, and I want to get what I want. And part of the reason I'm scared to have this conversation is I'm worried I won't get what I want.
Say more about that.
Well, if I'm thinking I want my client to pay a higher fee, I want to raise the fees, I might start getting some attachment to that result. I'm like, if the client says no, then that's going to go badly. So now I don't even want to have the conversation and hear a no. But if I'm willing to do step 4, which is to get curious and listen, this is where we get relational. And I can find out about their world. They might have other ideas. My client might have a really good reason why the fees shouldn't go up right now. And now if I come from that perspective, like I'm actually willing to listen, I'm coming from partnership. So I'm actually assuming the call's going to go better.
Right.
Whereas if I'm trying to get something from the other person, I've just separated myself from them. Of course, I'm going to get nervous about how it's going to go because I'm not even caring about their world.
Right.
So this step is groundbreaking. Get curious, maybe negotiate. They might have a better idea than you had. They might have information you didn't have. And you want to see if you can get on the same page. And important in this step, are you open to hearing a no? Because if you're not, you may not be ready to have the conversation.
Right. So be open for whatever the possibility shows. So being in that place of curiosity, it could be yes, it could be no, there could be something in the middle, but being open to that leaves more actually possibility that is available in that conversation. So I love that.
There's more possibility and it's more relational. I'm actually caring what they think. They're listening to me. It's two people working something out. And one of the reasons it looks so tough, I haven't said this before, but I just saw it. One of the reasons it looks so tough is because I'm in my own world trying to get what I want from this person. Whereas if I really wanted to explore something with someone and I really was going to listen to them, it starts to become easier.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you're seeing it through their eyes and where they're coming from. So how does this come into, I know you talk a lot about embracing discomfort. How does that come into play with this equation?
Yeah. Well, these conversations are uncomfortable because of the fear of loss and what are they going to think of me. I had to call someone recently and say that I can't do the training that I committed to. I said I'd co-lead a 2-day training and I can't do it. And I was worried. I was worried that she was going to be upset that I'm bailing. Yeah. And I was worried about being judged because I'm going through a health issue and feeling tired. It happens a lot. I was like, what's she going to think of me? Am I going to lose the chance to do trainings in the future? All of this. So it was uncomfortable for me to reach out and have that conversation. And this is why we have to embrace discomfort, because if we want the gain, the great personal growth gains and the great result gains and the great connection gains from this, both at work and at home, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And this is why I love this line, the line I mentioned before. Are you open to a potentially awkward and yet possibly interesting conversation? Because it could be awkward. We're going to stumble through it. I don't even know how it's going to go, or I might not say the right thing. It's awkward and vulnerable.
Right. And just putting it out there to say, okay, are you willing to be part of the journey and conversation and let it lead us to wherever it leads us to? And, we can just see what happens with that. And there's so many things that we feel we can control in our life and so many things that just happen. How is it that, I know that you've had, we were talking about kind of emotionally getting uncomfortable, but how do you feel there's some connection between physical discomfort and being able to access some of these things? So for instance, you have had, you can maybe speak a little bit about your gliding accident and what made some shifts for you in terms of how it impacts the conversations you had and how you show up since then.
Well, they sound like there might be two questions in my world. So I'll start with the first one. Okay. The embracing discomfort, we teach this in the tough conversations training in companies and in prisons. And one exercise that we sometimes do is this Qigong exercise where we have people being in an uncomfortable position. It's not uncomfortable in the first 10 seconds, but after like 8 minutes, the body actually gets shaking. And it's a way of us helping people see how we run from discomfort. And it's not that big a deal, but we're like, oh no, it's uncomfortable. I got to sit down. Can you go through it? And I found I've just started jogging recently, and it's uncomfortable. My lungs are burning, and I'm noticing like I want to stop. It's not hurting me, but I just feel like I want to stop. And I know one trainer who does cold showers. At the end of his shower, he'll turn it on to cold and handle that for 30 seconds. And it's a way that he embraces discomfort. So if you can start to do it in life, then physically, I believe it can pass over to being willing to do it emotionally. And I wonder if it works the other way around. If you're willing to be uncomfortable in conversation, then maybe you'll be uncomfortable in your business that you're building, or the job, the career that you're going for, the relationship. Maybe you'll be willing to be uncomfortable when it comes to exercise. You go that extra mile and stop being such a baby. And I include myself in that. We become babies in this century. 200 years ago, I know people lose a foot and they hobble over and put a Band-Aid on it. I know I'm exaggerating, but these days everything's so comfortable and so easy. We've got this small bubble, and you step outside of it. Oh no, my seat can't recline. I'm in trouble. In the plane, it doesn't go back far enough, right? We're upset by things like that.
Right.
So I hope that answered your first question.
Yes, it did. Would you like to elaborate on the second?
Can you say the second one again?
Well, we were talking specifically about. I just lost my.
You mentioned paragliding. It was paragliding,
yes.
and
Yes.
I think the accident.
Right. So yeah, I was talking about the correlation between. We were talking initially about an emotional trigger and emotionally being open. How does physical discomfort relate to the emotional discomfort? And did your accident have an impact on you that now impacts the kind of conversations or the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think the accidents had an impact. One of the things I enjoy that I'm passionate about is daring. And again, this may have come from my history and not standing up to bullies and asking girls out. I don't like feeling small. It doesn't feel good. I'd rather risk and hear a no and fail and know that I went for it, because then I feel good about myself. So daring, I've stepped off a mountain in Nepal and gone up. It's an amazing experience, solo. Step off, go up from the mountain and fly 10,000 feet under a storm cloud. And I think if you're willing to be daring in life, that can translate over to being daring in conversation. And likewise, you can just say, well, I'm just going to be daring. Like I just spoke to a client, did a coaching session, and her boss is going over this sales methodology every week. Same methodology, same lecture. She's going nuts. And I'm like, would you like to speak up and say something and see if you can redirect it? And she doesn't want to be daring. It's like it's like a real edge for her just to do that. Right. But if you can just speak up a little bit, you can start to practice. Now, the flip side of that is you don't want to be too daring. And I've realized a number of times in my life, I've gone too far. So paragliding is probably one example. In fact, even just doing the paragliding, I did 100 hours of it, and I broke my back in Colombia. And I had a realization that I am not willing to risk the consequence of that. So when you have a tough conversation, you're probably risking something, and you've got to ask yourself, am I willing to risk that loss? You may not be willing to risk your partner leaving you for the truth. I am. If my partner's going to leave me because of some truth I'm going to say, then let's have it happen now, and I'll cry and mourn for however long it is. Right. Some people, they're not willing to risk it. So you may not have that conversation. I've confessed to crimes. I once called and when I was a kid, I stole some, I was like 18, 19. I stole the college sign a couple of times, and, you know, it cost money. And 15 years later, I called and confessed and apologized and offered to make it right. Now, there's a low chance that I'm going to be prosecuted, but there was a chance that I'd be prosecuted. So you got to decide, like, are you willing? I was willing to be prosecuted, to apologize. You may not be willing. It could have been in the papers. I could have been embarrassed. There was all of that came with it. Right. So I realized paragliding, I was no longer willing to risk the consequence of that action. I was no longer willing to risk paralysis and death, whereas before I was. So I stopped doing it. And I think it's influenced, just had me have a little bit more humility when it comes to daring and telling people, yeah, go do it, go do everything. Saying, no, take a look at the potential gain, because you may not have even looked, and then take a look at the potential risk and decide if there's actual profit. Right.
So what is that kind of fine line between, daring greatly and getting out of your comfort zone and putting yourself out there, and making a conscious decision to not dare because you're not willing to have the consequences? How do you make that fine line between those things?
Well, it may be a fine line or it may be very obvious, but in the worksheet, which we'll give you guys, the worksheet has one question saying, what's your hope or intention? Like, what's your gain? And then what is the loss? What are you risking here? And you have to check a box to say, I'm willing to risk that consequence. Now, I think people get too conservative and they're like, nah, I'm just not like, my client is like, I don't want to risk rocking the boat with my boss. I'd rather just put up with these boring lectures week after week.
Right.
Okay. That's her choice. For me, I'd at least like to find out, hey, I've been hearing this each week and I've been working here for 15 years. I think I got a grip on it. You got a lot of experience. Is there something else that you could teach me or that we could go over instead that might be more useful? Yeah. Definitely. And maybe I get a no, like, no, we have to go over this. All right. I'm going to suck it up.
So a lot of what we've talked about here is looking at things that we're making decisions that we're taking responsibility for, that we are looking what's possible and doing that. What about, can you speak a little bit about, as a young child witnessing your sister being murdered? Can you talk a little bit about that? That feels completely outside of your control and something that horrific at a young age. What kind of impact did that have, and how does that come into play with you daring greatly?
Wow. Well, firstly, that's the first time in my life I've heard the word murdered. She was killed in a traffic accident. So I'd say murder is probably a strong word. Okay. But I did see the accident happen. I was 7 years old and I watched her.
Were you in the car?
No, I was not in the car. It was a school bus, actually.
Okay.
And so I saw that, and I'll tell you how it's impacted my life, and we'll see if it answers your question. I shut down emotionally. I didn't know that. It wasn't like, oh, let's shut down emotionally now. I've worked it out 20 years later in therapy. But what I learned to do was to not feel and to not be vulnerable. So I spent about 25 years doing that. And then I've spent the last 25 years doing the opposite, because I wanted to reclaim the connections with people that I never had. I wanted to reclaim feeling my heart. I wanted to lean into vulnerability and take a risk to be seen for who I am so that I can actually receive true love. So I've spent the last 25 years doing that. Now, your question was specifically about how did it influence, was it my work? Was it tough conversations?
Daring, how it influenced you daring. And so I believe you spoke to this in terms of, the emotional aspect of it, but is there something else that comes to you?
I don't know if it did affect my daring, or if it did, I don't know how. I know that it affected me going and looking for what I missed out on. And to do that, I had to be daring. It's a risky business, opening your heart to other people. Definitely. So that was what I wanted. It's like, I have to get back to what was missing. And there's really no safe way to do it. The doorway to the real gold is through those awkward, tough conversations. The easy conversations don't bring us that much.
Right. Yeah, it's the depth of getting to know people on such a deep level. I'm sure that's actually one of the connections. I was just thinking now when we were talking about our mutual friend, Sayeda, when we had connected, one of the things I cherish about her is she goes so deep, so quickly in her conversations. And I just respect that so much about, my close friends. And this whole idea that we can keep ourselves safe is a very interesting conversation in and of itself. And I'd like to kind of move into how is it you started working with people in prisons, and what has that unfolded for you?
Well, when I heard years ago that someone I knew was leading a dance group in prison, I was fascinated, because I've been doing 5 rhythms dance for a number of years. It's helped me get into my body, sweat your prayers. And when I found out they're going to prison, I'm like, I couldn't get my head around it. I'm like, how do you get inmates doing this? And how do they allow you to get in? So I think I was fascinated by the whole thing, and also by the lack of freedom. Like, I think I take my freedom for granted. And I'm like, here are these people, I watch prison movies, and I'm like, what's that all about? And then when I heard through the grapevine that a friend of a friend was doing authentic relating training, tough conversations training in prisons, I was like, wait a minute, that's my thing. This is what I do. I teach authentic relating and tough conversations. Can I play? Can I get in? Is there a way I can be involved? And he put me in touch with the director, and the director said, okay, come along to one and see what you think. So now I've been to 4 prisons and trained staff from 20 prisons. And wow, it's a real eye opener, or maybe an ice shutter to go in there and have them slam the door behind you and know that you can't get out unless they open 2 doors to let you out. And then sometimes you can't even get out at all. Sometimes you're on lockdown. Like last prison, we're on lockdown because there was a hostage drill at a neighboring prison, and we had to mobilize in support of their hostage drill. And so just threw out all the training, and I couldn't even go to the car to rest. Right. No one's in or out. So it's a whole different world. And I think it's quite intense, but also very rewarding, because the inmates that I've been training have been very grateful. Very grateful that we would take the time to come from our great lives to drive 4 hours, stay in an Airbnb, and spend 2 days training them in tough conversations and how to be relational. And they're just so, sometimes they're in tears and sometimes I'm in tears. It's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Wow. It just kind of took me back to, I used to go to prisons as a police officer for parole hearings. And it was like the one time where we actually had to lock up our gun, and you actually went into the prisons without weapons. And I thought of the one time for me to not have a weapon, it feels like I would want to have one here. And it is a very unnerving thing to hear the slam, of the gates and the bars. And it's a very surreal, different world. And it really does bring up this sense of lack of freedom and not having choice about what it is that you're doing. And so it's great that you are imparting some of these skills that, unless people do have these kind of volunteer efforts, they really don't get those, and they don't have those types of opportunities. So it's definitely a wild look at a different side of life.
Yeah, it is. And I got such respect for Lori Lazar as the executive director. She's got this nonprofit called Authentic Relating International, and she's cold calling prisons. Like she's like, you guys need this. She's cold calling and leaving voicemails and getting calls back saying, yeah, we do. So I've got a lot of respect. And can I give a plug for the nonprofit?
Sure, please.
Yeah, if you guys like like what that nonprofit is up to, because these inmates will be your neighbors. They really will. And we want them to be normalized. You can, for $5 a month, you can become like a founding member. You know, the cost of a latte. Go to authenticrelating.org. And she'd be just thrilled to hear from you, or get any kind of donation so that we can do more prisons.
Right. Oh, wow. That just reminded me of someone else I want to connect you with. We'll connect after this, but I had someone who was convicted of a gang murder, who did his time and came out and now is doing prison work. It's called Defy. And it's about really changing who they are. And, he's talked to me about coming in and doing some speaking in there. And it's just, it's wild because, he looks at the same skills of an entrepreneur are ones that, were employed for criminal activities. I mean, they are thinking outside the box. They're doing interesting things. And, if you can, hone that energy into something more productive, then the possibilities are endless. And so I had some interesting conversations with him we talked about my life on the street as a police officer and his life on the street as a gang member, and how we did similar activities at night in terms of certain times a day and the conversations that we had. And it was really this kind of surreal conversation that we were having around that. And talk about deep conversation about how you feel walking down an alley at 3 a.m. and, the possibilities of things that can happen. And it was just really an interesting looking at a flip side of the coin of how we were operating in the world.
Well, what I'm getting from that is that, prison life is still life, and business life is still life. So it's the same. We all need the same skills. In prison, one of the issues they might have to deal with is someone coming at them with some kind of charge. Like someone might say, "Hey, bitch," which is like being called out. Well, in the boardroom, you're probably not going to hear that. But there's a different way that someone's going to call you out and come at you. So, or there's some behavior you don't want someone in the prison to do, and how can I artfully influence them?
Right. Know the language of the environment.
Yeah, but there is the same principles that you're going to do, because in a business, you've still got to alter people's behavior. You've still got to say, that doesn't work for me. You've still got to say, could you do that? You've still got to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling when that happens. Relationship, same thing. It's a different environment. We might use different words, but the skills that we're teaching, it's amazing to see that it's across the board, the same skills are needed.
Right. Absolutely.
To go deeper with people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and speaking about environments, one of the things I love to ask my guests, because environments impact us in so many different ways. We have a different feeling in our bedroom versus our kitchen versus our office. What is your favorite room in your home and why?
Well, I'm going to go outside the box. I love my home, but my favorite room is the patch of land right next to the house. Because I get to just sit in a chair. My dog gets to play and dig. I'm looking out over the valley. I've got the sun. I'm getting my work done. So I love all of my house, but I'm going to call that my favorite room.
Wonderful. I love that, because the places that are our favorite places, that really has an impact on how we live our life and what kind of enjoyment we get to have out of that. So I know that people are going to want to stay connected with you. And can you share with us how they can do that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you guys can download the 4-step Tough Conversations blueprint and the worksheet for free. It's at playforreal.life, playforreal.life. You can also subscribe to the Tough Conversations podcast. I'd love to have you listen to me as well as Diane, if you like. And if you're part of running a company, I'm up for transforming cultures by giving every single staff member access to just-in-time coaching for tough conversations, so they can role play it and go out there and have it masterfully instead of avoiding it for a year. So all three of those things, playforreal.life.
Perfect. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes so people will be able to connect with you. And thank you so much for that download. It'll be so helpful for people to have. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
It's worth it. It's worth it. You may not actually know what your tough conversations are, and that's fine. But if you get a piece of paper and just write down the people that come to mind that you have anything outstanding with, or any kind of frustration or toleration or resentment, every single person on that list is a conversation ready to happen. You just need to find the right steps to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, David, so much for sharing your wisdom and being here on the show today.
Thanks, Diane. Pleasure.
Definitely. Well, and for our listeners out there, thank you so much for your most valuable resource, your time, sharing it here with us. We will have all of the contact information for David in the show notes. I also have a free gift in there for you as well, resetyourpowergift.com. You know, having those different skills about how you can stand more in your power and not second guess yourself. And we would love to hear your comments. Like, what are your takeaways from the show today? You know, make sure that you tag both David and I in there. Any questions that you may have, we're here to serve. And please share this and get the word out and start looking at where do you need to have your next tough conversation. Thank you so much for being here. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now.
Yeah.